What's up, dudes? It's a cold morning in Nashville. I forgot to turn the heat on this morning when I went to drive the kids up to Brentwood, and it's cold down here. The fingers are not warm yet. They are not warm yet. I don't know if you saw. I tried to do a little run here, and it was behind. It was behind the beat, but my brain was on the beat, but the fingers, they ain't finging when it's too cold. You know what I mean? So I got the little heater running right here, so that's all right. I want to talk about a controversial topic, but listen, before I do, this isn't politics. I'm just talking about the effects of world events on the guitar market. So you want to argue in the comments below? Go ahead. I don't care. It helps the YouTube algorithm. You give me all your opinions. I actually read all the comments, and I dig it, man. I dig it. You let me know your whole diatribe on everything. I'm a conspiracy theorist at heart. So tell me all about the JFK and the moon landing. Go ahead, put it all in the comments. I don't mind. I don't mind. But today we are going to talk about something a little controversial. You saw in the title, we're talking about Trump and the tariffs and the effect on the guitar market. And I have a theory of what's going to happen. Now, before we go any further, you've obviously heard about some tariffs. This is not an endorsement of these tariffs or whatever. I'm not a smart enough dude to know how everything affects everything. But I do have a couple degrees. I did study economics, and I used to run some. I used to do some, and it doesn't matter what I did before this. It doesn't matter. But I know a thing or two about guitars. So, let's talk about it. I am a fan of economics and of the guitar. So let's apply some critical thinking to this. We have a scenario where the incoming president is talking about tariffs. And there's a lot of talk of tariffs on China. And where is all the cheap guitar stuff made right now? China. Now, there's also good stuff made in China. But the interesting thing about China is you got over in Beijing, you've got the Eastwood factory. They're making high quality woodwinds and stuff. When they make guitars, they try to make them like Gibsons. That's really what they're trying to do. One piece bodies, all this stuff. Then you have the Chibson people in China who are just making the stuff. If it looks the part, it is the part. And you've got talks of tariffs and what's this going to do. At the same time in the United States, you have this sort of guitar apocalypse. All the guitars that were bought during COVID and 2021 and everything, all the second guitars, second, third, fourth, fifth guitars people had, a lot of times they're selling them because times are tough or because they just want to hedge against times being tough or they don't really want them anymore and the used prices are just falling. They're down like 20, 25% if you're in a non-vintage used guitar. It's a great time to buy a guitar. I'll be doing that video soon too. But what does this mean? We have all these converging things. Well, let's talk about these tariffs and how likely they are to happen. The truth is, I don't know, but let me tell you this. The last time we heard talks of big changes to our trade relationship with China, those threats, I'll call them, were mostly used as a bargaining chip. They didn't really come to fruition the way we were told they might. And if you remember, there was a time previously, in the last time that Trump was in the White House, where the United States really did not want Iran to have money to fund Hezbollah and their what they were doing in Israel. And so the United States took the position of no one buy oil from Iran. And several countries said, you can't tell us what to do. So the United States they started saying, we will cut off imports from anybody selling oil to Iran. And they told this to China. The idea that the United States would cut off imports from China is absolutely an insane idea. It's ludicrous. The American economy could not sustain, all that supply chain disruption. That would make COVID supply chain disruption happen again. And it might even take longer because it wouldn't be a bottleneck at the ports. It would be, you'd have to find new supply chains. Now, we know this is a threat because we've already seen Apple move iPhone production away from China into several countries, getting ready in case there's a trade war, right? We've already seen other people, more manufacturing and guitar manufacturing moving into Indonesia, moving into Vietnam, out of China. But of course, there's never been more guitars made in China than there are today. So what's the likelihood of all this happening? I don't know, but I'll just point this out. Last time it was used as a bargaining chip because the United States went to China and said, we'll cut off imports. We won't have any trade relationship if you don't stop buying oil from Iran. And China sort of backed up and went, whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't we don't even buy oil from Iran. What are you talking about? Well, y'all do whatever you're doing, okay? So that is something that this could be, right? This could be something that is said very seriously up front, but may not actually come to fruition. The tariffs could be much more pointed at specific areas. They could be much more pointed at technology like Huawei. We saw the United States take a firm position against Huawei and the importing of Huawei technology. And we saw some people say, don't use Huawei phones in any government applications or whatever. It gave Huawei kind of a bad name. We might see something like that. I wonder, though, if we will see a disruption to the guitar market. And one thing that has me wondering that is, if you look on Thoman's website, they do make some instruments in China under the Harley Benton brand. A lot of these instruments seem to be made in China are out of stock. You can't get them for months. And it also says that you might be responsible for any tariffs, or any imports. I don't know if that includes the tariffs or what. So interesting to me that we're having these outages or these stockouts on a lot of these brands, and they don't seem to be coming back in the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks. They're coming back in a while, and I think that's because, we don't really know what the cost of those things might be. Now, we do have some other scenarios here too. Will these tariffs apply to other countries or just China? Obviously, there's a lot of other countries that have benefited from manufacturing in the West moving over to Southeast Asia. Japan is still a manufacturer in a much larger way than the United States, even though the Nikkei is a multi-decade old world stock market. Japan has largely moved to a technology and service-based economy. However, there is still manufacturing made in Japan. A lot of the tech manufacturing is still a large sector in Japan, just like it is in South Korea. Now, I mentioned those two countries, Japan and South Korea, because Japan and South Korea are the United States' two closest allies in the region, in Southeast Asia. If there were ever a sort of move towards Taiwan by China, these are the two countries that would experience the most shakeup. I do not see the United States somehow trying to punish South Korea, which is a close Western ally. South Korea and the United States have had a very close relationship, and you can see that in also immigration policy. And the ability to travel back and forth. You see that there's a deep business relationship. Many larger tech companies today have roots in South Korea. And we really have viewed South Korea post-World War II, and Japan and South Korea were first places for cheap labor, and now they've become places for high-tech labor that has just not existed in the United States. If you are looking at me right now, you are watching on a screen that was not made in the United States of America. There is no capacity to make LCD, LED, and plasma, any sort of liquid crystal. There's no capacity to make that in the United States like that or discs like that. All of those screens come from somewhere in Asia, maybe a couple other places, but we never built that. Manufacturing was already declining in the United States by the time those technologies are coming up. So we never built those factories. We've never had that. Those weren't even jobs we lost. Those are jobs that only originated when we already had production largely over there after globalism had sort of spread. HW, what do you talk about globalism? Here's something that could happen. We could see these tariffs come in, and we might see a real lifting, an inflationary effect of cheap guitar prices going up, where all of a sudden Thomann is not able to offer guitars at $129 or $250. Those prices would have to go to $250 and $350. If you are selling a guitar, if you're Thomann, you're selling a guitar for $199 and you're making another Harley Benton brand, there's no way you could be paying the Chinese OEM more than $100 for that. And that's if you really are taking a pretty razor-thin markup being the manufacturer as well. That would be an increased markup from just being a distributor, but it's not really the full keystone after you take into account the cost of importing and everything. So some of these instruments may go up in price. Now, what's interesting is as these tariffs are going to have an inflationary effect on cheaper instruments, We have up here all of these mid-priced $1,000 and less mid-tier instruments have a lot of downward pressure economically because there's way too many of them. There's just so many guitars on the market today. In the resale market, prices are being depressed. They're down like 25%. It would be a bad time to really need to sell a Schecter or a mid-priced Mexican Fender right now, or a high-end Squire, or an Ibanez, any of the mid-tier Ibanez's, ESPs. These things, if you're on a Hagstrom, just something that is not really that remarkable in terms of, no, people aren't really getting in the market going like, I've always dreamed of a Hagstrom guitar or an ESP guitar. They have their place in the market, but especially their mid-tier stuff, the prices are just so depressed. It's a great time to get a deal if you're looking for a player. There's a lot of value there from a player standpoint. It's a great time to get a deal on stuff. If we did see import tariffs being placed on countries like Korea and Japan, we would see Sire guitars probably go up even further in price than we've seen them recently go up. We would see Schecters go up. We would see PRS SEs probably being a lot less competitive. And then there's these other countries like Vietnam and Indonesia who may just get caught up in the sort of like, well, we're not as close relationally with the United States as Japan and Korea, South Korea, the good Korea, but maybe they put tariffs, maybe they don't. We don't know. What can we do to get around these tariffs, And I don't know what would happen to those instruments. So we might see a bit of a shakeup here. But again, there's a lot of downward pressure from used instruments getting cheaper. Upward pressure at the bottom from a lot of the cheapest stuff coming out of China might have a tariff. Would other things have a tariff? I really don't know. Like I said, again, these things tend to be worded in the strongest fashion because they usually have some other purpose. That purpose could just be to really drive home a pro-American agenda, which is something I think has already been done, and we might see it being pulled back. If you look at another policy that went, sort of arm in arm with this tariff policy, it was the immigration policy. What was said in the election was mass deportation. Again, I'm not endorsing anything. I'm just pointing out. What was said in the election was mass deportation. After the president-elect has been elected, or has become the president-elect, before he's taken office, we've seen this plan change to something much more nuanced. Now what's being said is we're going to go after the criminals first, and we're going to go after cities that help hide the criminals from the federal government. Okay, that's something that it seems like anybody would support, criminals being deported. And then we started getting things being said in interviews like the Dreamers, those people who have been in the United States a long time, who are not citizens but were born here, maybe they haven't been back to their original country for decades, or maybe were here as children. We've heard the president-elect Trump say we need to make a path for them. Well, that's a fancy way of saying there will be a citizenship path for some people, which is actually what the other side was saying, right? So that's a very middle of the road. That's a very bipartisan idea. A path for some people, kick out the criminals, but dreamers, good people who pay their taxes, hardworking people who have been in the country a long time, may be able to stay. Now that you see how that very strong language gets walked back? I have a feeling that's going to happen on these import tariffs on guitars. That is just the way things tend to go, right? Joe Biden was going to give us free college. And then it was some student loan forgiveness on these types of loans for this thing, blah, blah, blah. Everything gets walked back to the middle, right? You say the biggest thing to rile up your base, and then everything gets walked back to the middle. That is sort of how politics works. And now we've even seen even more talk, if you've been paying attention, walking the sort of immigration thing back. And I think we're going to see more on tariffs being walked back. But instead of those things being in the media, the sort of walking back of that immigration policy, instead what you see are things like the Gulf of Mexico will be renamed the Gulf of America. It's funny. Or Governor Trudeau. You know what I mean? Those are the things that make the headlines, not the real things that are happening sort of in the government. So is this going to shake up the guitar market? I think so. And I think if you're a manufacturer, you're probably got to be sitting back. I wouldn't be surprised if we see very few budget instruments hitting the shelves early 2025, because I think everyone has to have been holding off on orders from manufacturers until they understand what the pricing is going to look like. I don't think anybody wants to jump out there. Nobody in Fender wants to jump out and say you're going to be able to get this guitar for, not this guitar, but get this guitar for $699 at Guitar Center, and then they actually hit Guitar Center at $899. Nobody wants that. No, nobody wants. It's not good for business. So I think everyone's going to be holding back and just watching what happens. With that said, NAMM's coming up. We'll see what's out there, and I think a lot of people. I think the people who are manufacturing in Japan and Korea are probably sweating a lot less than the people who are getting all their stuff from an OEM in China right about now. And if you are into Eastman guitars, it could be this fact that if a big tariff comes, Eastman's Chinese company, they make high quality stuff. 30% on their stuff is going to be a big bump. So if you want to buy an Eastman guitar, you might be able to get it now before prices go up if we see these tariffs. And of course, if those tariffs come off at some point, if they go on and then come off, we'll see the used price market. You know, we could see new guitars being introduced at cheaper than used guitar. That could happen, you know, at some levels there. That could happen. So that's my thoughts on the subject. I really don't. I wish I had more answers, but time will tell. I've been HW.